Welcome to section 5, part 9. In this part, we're going to be extending our selection a bit. We're going to start with setting up our input modifier. With core input modifier key. And in our override here, will be other functionality in here later potentially, so keep that implemented function rather than just the simple setup. And now we want to add a debug option, so I'm going to come down to the bottom. I'm going to create an area for debug. Again, I'm just going to surround this with the if editor, sorry. And in here we want to check that our debug settings enabled, like done with previous debugs. It's going to be core settings that we're after here. It's going to include the RTS core settings.h. And then we want to check that we're, well, first of all, debugging RTS entities. We don't have that option there. I need to add that one. It's going to be a plugin. And while we're in here, we're going to add a category. I'm going to call it debug. I'm just going to, actually I'm going to change it to under player, debug player input, because that's more like what it is. It's not really to do with entities so much. It's just that we're going to use it in there. So I'm going to call it debug player input. I'll leave this in here because we'll probably use it at some point when we want to debug entities, but I'm actually going to check for debug player. Like so. And now we haven't set up a debug, so we haven't set up a debug what do you call it, a class, I guess, like we did in core. It was under the debug data, and we had this setup. So I want to do the same setup for entities. We have one in player as well. And it's just so we've got the log category and the local fines. I'm going to create a class here because I want a PPP file as well, an empty one. Just the quick way of giving us the two folders we need, files we need. And I'm just going to copy the entire class here. Oh, sorry, that's not the define log category is what it's the H file one. Okay, that's all there. This function will run on tick, so I just want to do a print screen for tick, and I just want to display what modifier key we're holding. So it's going to include our class we just created, the debug data, and we just need a color, so the color you like. A print message. And we just want to display the enum value that we're setting. And we're going to execute that in tick. And we don't have a tick, so it's tick back in. And we'll initialize our modifier key. Modifier. And that's working. So we just need to enable that. So in our core settings, we're going to ensure that player debugging is on, and we're going to debug player input. There's our modifier key. We can see it's working. Press the different key combinations. So that's good. I forgot the virtual here. That's what that line will be. Or has that still worked? I might add it to the parent class too. Safe side there. And I think what we'll do is we'll add the start with tick on and can ever tick. We should be able to get that from game state. Those. Put them in both. But I'm pretty sure they're the defaults, but we'll just find those. Go. So we just get a cleaner display. You can change this to get display name as text, and then just do a string. So that'll just clean that up a bit. And we might get rid of this test. They are. And yeah, we'll fix up the includes the stuff for now. Point having it in there. Next, I just want to extend our selection setup. So I'm going to come into the entity data. Let's come into the entity data asset, and where we have select material here, I'm going to create another variable. It's going to be a bool. Let's say use decal, and I think I'll default it to false. I'm going to put a comment in here so it makes sense to us in the future or someone else that this will and then the other variable I want to add this float, and then it's going to add a modifier to change the size of the decal. I'll set it to and then we want to use these values, so we'll just go over to where we create our component. So it'll be in here. Create entity components, and we want to pass a new value through here. So put it after the data. And then I'm going to only add the component if that's true. Need to pass that through. And we've already cast to the data here, that's why I'm passing through, so I don't redo that in that function. And then the last one will be actually in the decal component, the on register. So where we're setting the max radius here, we want to times this by that value from the data. So the quickest way to get a data now would be through the entity component. So let's just make a getter for that on the entity component. Yeah. And then it's going to be the same sort of setup as all the other ones. So yeah, let's go and or return 1. So if you do 0, it'll times by 0, so it'll be 0. But if you do 1, it will ignore it. And then this will be data decal size modifier. Back to our component here. So let's just reload, test that one quickly. So we'll come in, we'll need to just set that in our data again. So we'll say use decal and 1.5 is fine. That's still working. And if we change this to huge so we can notice it, much bigger, so that's working. If you're wondering where I got the blue from, all I did for that was change the color in the material instances. I changed the amount as well just to stand out more. It's pretty hard to see when we're debugging in the previous video. Coming back to the code, we want to look at how we can select individual entities. So we're still going to have selections based on groups, but we're going to make it so we can select individual entities from within a group. So they'll still move as their own group, but you just might not have selected them all. I'm going to start by coming to the enum. We're not really going to use this setting yet, but I'm going to do some switches. So we might as well put this in so the option's there. Let's call this partial selection. That'll be the next one we add. The next thing we need to do is on our selection data here, is we want to add members. So we're going to add a property for members, variable, and it'll be an array of actors. In our constructor here, I might break this down level, but we're going to add that. Yeah, we can make that const. And then our get members function here, we're going to change to just getting this. It'll just assign turn members. And now we can control the selection, what members are actually selected of the selected group. Now I'm going to come across to, so we can close the entity data now, I think, and then we can come across to the component. And in our create player selection here, I'm actually going to remove this default. So we now have to always pass a selection type, and there might be some create player selections that we need to update. So what I'm going to add here is actor reference. But I'm going to default this to null. So we don't have to pass it if we don't need to, but what we will do is when we pass a single selection type from here, we pass single selection, we can also pass the actor to the individual selection. So just copy this from here. So now in here, this is where we want to do our switch. So that's still fine for the group lead there. We want to switch on our selection type. Generate those, and I'm going to make group selection the default. Let a default. That's just so if we add some other cases when we forget to come back here, it'll just select group. So now you can see this is erroring because it's looking for members. So hey, you were passing in members here. So let's create a members array for it to pass in. Now we don't have a partial at the moment, so I'm just going to take this break out. So it'll continue on and run the single selection there. But on the single selection, we want to check that that single actor we're passing in is valid or not a null pointer. And if it isn't, we want to add that member to members. That doesn't like being const. Sorry about that. For our default, which is group selection, we are just going to add the group members. Group, get members, pass members. I don't need to add here. That'll update our members with the members and they'll be assigned to the selection. Now, let's back to our player control. We can close this decal component. So back on our player controller, we need to update. If we come to our update box selection, we're going to need to modify our create group selection and update box selection to handle individual entities. So we're going to need a setting for that. So let's go to our settings, our entity settings, and let's add an option here to choose between either group selection or individual entity selection. I'm just going to duplicate this one, and yeah, I'll leave it under entities, and then we'll just change this to full and call it be allow group selection only. I might default it to false. Now we've got a setting that we can handle the different setup. So we come into our create group selections. First of all, let's retrieve the settings. So we need to get our developer settings. All right. So if we don't have settings, we're just going to bail out. Unlikely. Safe. So that's our settings reference there. So now what we need to do here is so we've got all the individual entities in an array here that we've passed in the selection box. Once we get to, I'm not a fan of for each. I'm going to change this to an index for loop, bj. You can use for each if you prefer them better. Name things. There is a bit of a performance saving, but it's so minor it doesn't really matter. But there's a performance saving here when you start when you start removing stuff from arrays. You can direct index removal, but not going to be a big deal in this situation. So we still want to check that the group is already been assigned. So this will just okay. So the whole point of this function is to take those entities and then spit out a new list of pending selections that's based on groups. So we're going to have to go through each entity, check if the group's there, check if the group is being put into this new pending selection. That's what that's doing. So this is saying, yes, it is in there. We want to assign B group added. Oh, again, we've got a B group added is true. That's still the case. If the group's already there, then we just need to add the members to it. So we need to check if we're allowed to select individual entities. Right, so if we are checking for individual entities, then we need to handle that case. Otherwise, we can just go on and do what we're doing here and handle group only. At this point here, the group has been added, and we need to add this entity that we're checking to the existing group. And this is where that new members array on the selection comes in. So we're basically building that. We're building this list on the new pending selection up again based on what entity. That handles a group when it's already assigned. Now, the reason why we created this past the single actor, if the group isn't added, so if it gets down to here, and it's going to fail at this point, right? So it's going to skip all this, and that's when we need it to come down to here, and this will be false. So the group isn't added, and so it's going to create a new selection out of the entity. So we need to pass the single, and we need to pass the entity. So then that'll go away and create a new selection with a single entity in it and then we add it to the new pending selections. So then the next time we come through and the group does exist, we then start adding the additional members to the new pending selection. So that's pretty straightforward. So now where this is called, we now have a new pending selection. But if we're allowed to select individual entities, the difference will be that these selections might not contain the full group of entities in the list. Now, in the update pending box selection, we need to handle that case. So there might be individual entities that we have to unhighlight as we move the drag box rather than the whole group. So we need to handle that case. I'm just going to back up here and copy this because we're going to have to check the settings again. So the same thing's going to happen. We're going to check if so this is all about what was selected the previous tick, which is this client pending selections, if you recall. And what we want this client pending selections to be is a list of things that need to be unhighlighted. If the group is still pending, that means there's probably an entity in the new selections that has to be selected, but it doesn't necessarily mean all of them. So we still need to add the group across to the remain. So we're building this remain pending list now. The group in the new pending selection is in the existing selection from the last tick, then it needs to remain pending. However, rather than just remove the whole group here, this is where we need to butt in and check if we're doing some entity checks. This time we need to handle both cases, so I'm just going to do an if else. So if it's groups only, then we can just continue as normal. I move this break down to so that's still the case there. No need to change that, right? So we found the group and we move it to the remain pending, and we remove it out of the pending selection. So we don't want it to unhighlight it because it's remain pending. And then confirm that it has been removed. So when we break out of this loop, we can remove it from the new pending selections as well. So remember this new pending selections, but at the end, we only want it to contain the new ones, and that's it. You can see here. So after we unhighlight, we empty, we add the remain pending, and then we add the new pending. Because we added the group to the end of this list, we need to get the index of that. So I'm just going to do that's the index of the last thing to be added to that. So, but we'll just make sure that that's valid. So now we want to clear the members of this list here. So we're going to use that index, get the members and empty it. And then we need to add back all the members. So going to be another for loop. And it's going to be over the new pending members list. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add that member to the remain pending. If it's in the new pending selections members list, then it's going to remain. It's going to remain selected. And then we need to, because it's going to remain selected, we need to remove the member off the pending selections list, because this list should only contain members that are going to be unhighlighted or not selected anymore, this tick. Okay. Now here we can't do a remove at index because the order might not be the same. So we need to actually just pass the actor itself and do a remove. That's what I was saying. If you could do a remove at here, you save a loop. So because it goes through the whole array and checks for a match, right? So if you just do a remove at, just removes from our index. What we're going to do now. So we need to remove the member from the new pending, because we want the new pending to be only the new member. And so that doesn't crash, we need to make this a reverse loop. Change that to loop. Because we're moving off the end, it won't matter because we're going backwards. If you're going forwards and you remove off the end, it changes the count, and for loops don't like changing count mid-loop. After that loop, so now we've got all our lists sort of squared away, we need to handle whether the group needs to remain in the list or be removed entirely. So we want to check if the existing pending group has no members left, then we can remove it. Because now we could have the group in the remove list and in the remain pending list. It could be in both because there'd be some members that need to remain selected and some that need to be deselected. And I'm saying selected, it's just in a tick, it's changing the highlight. So we need to check. Okay. Need to change that to reverse loop as well. In fact, I think all these need to be reversed. This one as well we're removing here, so it needs to be reversed. Sorry I'm not explaining that reverse loop properly, but basically if as this goes through each loop, I'm going to do a plus plus, so it's saying what's the number, and when that number changes and it tries to go, like it doesn't exist anymore, but so you're actually trying to select an invalid I index. Whereas if you go backwards, it starts at the back and minus is 1. I was never trying to choose that index that you've just removed off the end. It's always going backwards through the loop. Need to draw some fancy picture to explain it. I think not doing it very well. Needless to say, we need a reverse loop for these because we're removing off the end. And then the last one here, we actually need to handle the same as this here. So we can just because this is assigning it here, we just need to check if it's empty, then continue to remove it. So. Need to handle that outside of this loop, so we're just going to assign that remove. And that should be it. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Let's give that a build and see if we've got any errors from the changes we made. Looks like maybe I'll up one of the, yep, so this new selection should be I. That's the only issue outside of the, the 4 index loops compared to the 4H. You can get a bit confusing when you get 3 deep like that or more. You can name the values here too, I guess. So that's built okay. I'm just going to recheck my data. Yep, that's still on from before. And I'm going to check my project settings. So group selection only is disabled. So that means you can name that whichever way around you want. So now I'll to select individual entities. Run highlighting, looks all good. There we go. So it's still 3 groups selected, but you're just not selecting all the entities in the group. So one thing I noticed is individual selection isn't working, so let's just quickly fix that. And I know what it is because I always forget to do this. We need to add the entity trace channel. Default will be ignore. Come into our characters. Onto fusion. Change this to custom abilities or that back. Anyway, entity needs to be block as well. Or how that visibility happens. Anyway, if that fixed that. So come into our player controller and go to select. Do a breakpoint here. See what our client hit selected is. And I've got a debug game build, by the way, just so that I get more debug data. So that's hitting the thing. Let's see. Getting turned back to null. Yeah. So this is the change that we made. So we need to pass that entity to the client hit selectable, and that'll create a selection with that one entity in it. Okay, individual entities now. Look, it's getting highlighted. Yeah, okay. Do both. Or I should create a function. Both, whatever. That should do it. Yeah. We haven't used the multiplier, so let's throw that into the mix. So back in here, where we clear our selections here, let's just put a check in here. Now this will depend what key you want, but I'm going to call it control. So as long as it's not control, we'll clear it. So now I can still select individual, but if I hold control, I can add to the selection. Didn't recognize. Oh, yeah. So if it's a single selection, we want to skip this as well. So just don't want to clear the list. There we go. The next one I want to look at is partial group selection. So sort of like 6 groups but half. So like you hold Alt and click this guy here, you'll select this. And always them 3 and always those 3. So it's like internal subgroups in the group. But that's going to take a little bit, so I'm going to leave this video here and we'll crack on with partial group selections or subgroup selections in the next video. Thanks for watching.